we talk about one-on-ones are so important. Partnership is so important. And being honest with each other is so important, because when we're not honest with each other, we end up causing disconnection over time that breeds distrust.
Welcome back to Evolving Your Workplace. I'm Carol Schultz. So today's episode, we are going to get some insight from an expert on how to create security and trust in your company. For leaders in tech or any other constantly fluctuating industry, this one's for you. I'm joined by expert David Alsop, the Chief Human Resources Officer at Ultradent Products. David, thanks for joining me to discuss what's a really, really important topic. I have a lot of opinions on it. I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on it. But first, can you tell us a little bit about what you're focused on right now in your career as a HR leader?
Yeah, it's great to be here, Carol. I'm focused right now in my career on helping our company get to the next stage. We're trying to grow, and it's actually a great topic to talk about safety, because one of the biggest challenges that I think companies face in my career and now in the company I'm with right now is, how do we help the people that want to grow it to the next stage and have new ideas connect and collaborate with the people that have been here the longest, that want to make sure we don't lose the great things that we've always done. And sometimes those two groups, we're trying to do the same thing in different ways, and they don't always trust. And so I've seen that in a prior company, and that's really where we're at right now is Ultradent. We've been around for 45 years as a professional dental company, and we're getting into the direct-to-consumer space, and that has a lot of change for us. And it has a lot of opportunity for growth for us. And so we've got huge opportunities for growth, but how do we do that in a way that ensures we don't lose the best of our past? Because a lot of companies fail because they give up on what made them great, because they think they got to do it differently, and they give up on all the great knowledge that got us there. And so right now at Ultradent, we're trying to figure that out, is how do we grow and take the best of our past and then evolve into the future. And so I think that relates a lot to safety. And how do you make sure it's safe to make sure all the ideas come out, challenge one another in our notions and our biases, and how do we work through those things? So that's a lot of what I'm focused on right now, is how do I help my company get through that stage of growth?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking really, your historical business that you've been in, which has been, business to business, right? To dental offices. And it's very different going either, if you want to call it direct to consumer or business to consumer. And it's a very different type of sale.
It is.
Because consumers buy differently than businesses tend to buy.
Yep.
Right. So I'll be anxious to hear how that continues to open up and what we see. So, first off, I know really what my answer is to this next question, but I'm really interested in hearing what yours is, right? So for industries where there's constant fluctuation, right? Tech, manufacturing, which is what you're doing, retail, professional services, et cetera, how can leadership create security among their employees?
I'm going to start with something that may be counterintuitive to a lot of people when it comes to safety, and then get to what people are pretty intuitive with when it comes to the conversation on safety. I believe, and I've found throughout my career, and I'm coming to a point in my career where I believe managing performance is the basis of building safety in an organization with an employee and a manager partnership. A leader has to be able to clarify, what do they expect when they hire someone, and know that they're hiring the right person for that role and the duties they expect for performance for the company. Because they need someone that's going to be paid to deliver maximum contributions with the skills, abilities, and diverse background that they have for that purpose. And where safety often breaks down is either they hire the wrong person, or they don't communicate to that person in a way that the person can succeed in the role. And all of a sudden you're pitted in this relationship of, this person's not doing what I want them to. How do I talk to them in a way that maintains trust if they're caring about it? And care is a big part of leadership. You have to care about that person's success. You have to care for them to succeed with you in the feedback that you give. And if you don't hire the right person and they don't fit that role, you're often just in this gridlock of why won't this person listen and understand what I'm asking them to do? Well, if you go back to the roots, you may have hired someone that doesn't have the intuitive skill sets for that role. And so when you get to that point where you do have that clarity, you do have the right person in the role, half the battle is over with safety because you're on the same page. And when people are communicating with their boss, helping them understand what they need for success, it becomes a partnership to figure out, how do I remove the barriers from your success? How do I support you to deliver maximum success and have some of the flexibility you need for these moments in life that occur? And so I've just come to a point in my life where I start with performance and communication and trust between a manager and an employee. When they work together in a way that they have the right people in the right roles at the right times together, trust starts to just become a natural thing that they can manage over time. But you've got to get the right person in the role, and you've got to make sure you're managing their performance, because the purpose of a role is to perform for a company. And this is one thing I think we're struggling with in general in our United States society is I think things have flipped where it's so focused on the individual that many individuals often come in and they don't talk about, what do you need for me to succeed and deliver maximum success first?
Right.
They come in and say, I want to work remote. I want to have this. I've got this going on, and you need to honor this, this, and this. And they come up with this list of honoring themselves to the company, and trust goes down a bad place because the manager's saying, well, we haven't even talked about what you're going to succeed for this pay that we're giving you. And I think we're in a very difficult place where we've got to get back to understanding you need to clarify what performance means and how to deliver maximum success so that then we can have conversations of how to do that and have maximum satisfaction. And so performance is just really big to me. And I think there's other things that go after that. But if you don't start with performance and trust in that performance, trust really is hard to find in a job.
Yeah, I mean, I could not have said that better myself. And it's a pleasure for me to hear somebody that does not have the background I have that understands that, right? I think that really companies don't, ultimately companies don't understand how to determine, well, forget about just the skills and abilities, what the competencies are that are required.
Yeah.
And in a role. And most, leaders do not know how to do that.
No.
And I can't tell you the numbers of times when I'd be doing a kickoff meeting back when I was still doing search work, and I would hear, oh, that's a really good question. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
And, they just don't realize, because why? Well, they're not a professional headhunter. I was a professional headhunter, right? So it's kind of like people thinking they can do other jobs, and they really can't. So, it's not only looking at what is the greater skills, abilities, cultural fit, communication skills, all those types of things, whatever they might be, and then building what it is that you're looking for, that position description, and looking at a competency model. I've told companies for years when I've worked with them that it's so important. And this goes really along the lines of exactly what you were saying is, we've got, let's say, 30 competencies for this role, to pull a number out of my head. And they may be in 5 different categories: leadership skills, communication skills, your ability to do the job, those types of things.
Yeah.
Cultural fit. And under each of those, there are a number of competencies under each of those categories. And we look at, to do that job effectively, is this a low, medium, or high importance competency? And then, so now when we're interviewing, we can rate somebody 1 to 5 in that competency. And it gives us a way that's not subjective to start looking at people. And it also greatly decreases the chances of having let's call it a bad hire, right? And it is so important that, you were talking about that, communication between a manager and the employee. What I'd like to know is, how do you train your leaders, or who is training your leaders to teach them how to communicate effectively? Because their subordinates they could be Z, they could be millennial, they could be X, they could be boomers.
Mm-hmm.
They could be, blue collar, white collar. I mean, all over the map, and people may communicate in different ways because that's what they've been taught.
Yeah, we have a learning and development group
Okay.
that works for me, and it took us a while to get the right people into that group because I'll be honest, I didn't start out in HR, and I got into HR, and I noticed a lot of times in HR it was people that just were very confident in checking boxes. And a lot of times we had to ask the question to the leaders, like, are you getting value out of this training we're giving?
Yeah.
And
Right.
and so when I got that right, in my view of training, that it has to be something that delivers change in behavior towards an end outcome you want, which in our case, we view leadership as the most important part of our organizational success, because leaders have to align deep parts of this organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have, we call it our Ultralead program, and we have a program that involves employees also. And so we train everybody when they come into the organization. We invite them to a values in action class, is what we call it. And we talk to them about honoring their values and understanding what their values are. And oftentimes we find people have never thought about their own values. Like, what's important to you? What makes you happy in your life? And so we talk to them about those values, and we give them categories to think about what their values are. And then we lead them through a diversity conversation of inclusion about, we're all different in many ways beyond what we see, and we have different values. And then we have these core values of our company. And we believe these core values are broad enough that will include anybody that wants to succeed with us. But if your personal values can't coincide with our core values, maybe it's not the right place for you. And that's fine. Mm-hmm. Because our core values are very specific to our culture. And so we get employees through that, and we teach them how to partner through. And we talk about, there's two sides to our model of leadership. And it's a partnership between maximum contributions in your job and us understanding what maximum satisfaction means to you, and finding the limits and balance between the two to get to the best place. And we call it finding your apex. And so that word apex is something we train constantly on, is we care about individual apexes, meaning they're satisfied and they're delivering high performance. Mm-hmm. And when those two things are coinciding, everything's working out great for both us and the employee. The manager is the key part to that. And so that's where we focus our Ultralead training from there, is how do we help leaders understand that balance? And we call it the X model of engagement. It's something we pay a license for. And we teach leaders on how to have conversations about delivering maximum performance and clarifying what that means for the values, the strategies, and the goals of the organization. But also, how do you listen to an employee to be able to understand what their needs are, what their situations are, right, what their life circumstances are that they're struggling with behind the scenes, so that we can make sure they don't drop the ball on their performance, and we navigate those individual circumstances.
That's so to hear. Yeah.
Maybe the only other thing I'd say is we have a training suite that we use that gets high feedback, and if it doesn't, we're not using those courses. But if I were to simplify the most impactful thing we've found that we ask at the end of every year with a performance review, and we just call it a performance survey that they take in 5 minutes about, their partnership. We ask, how often are they having a one-on-one? Because we expect a one-on-one at least monthly. For some roles, it's weekly. In manufacturing, monthly is the minimum. Yeah. What we found is when that one-on-one is not in sync, where an employee is saying, yeah, I'm having a one-on-one this frequently, and the manager validates that and they're on the same page, that's where we find the disengagement in our organization, is when there's not a one-on-one partnership growing. And so we spend a lot of time training on how to have a valid partnership to manage performance and engagement with an employee. And I always simplify this for leaders the first time I talk to them, in just saying, if constantly, at least once a month, you're asking your employee, how are you doing? Just start there and see where that takes the conversation in your one-on-one. How are you doing on your goals that we talked about last time and your progress against those goals? Let's talk about that.
So, David, what do you feel is the best way to create trust in your employees?
It's a good question. I find one of the biggest difficulties with trust is where I started with at the start with is performance. But what I found, and I have a friend who started up a business that I connected with that he talks about brain science. His name's Evan Lapointe. He'd be a great guest on your podcast. And he talks about how if we think about brain science and everything that we do, oftentimes business has historically thrown money at the problems, thrown incentives at the problems, and forgotten how the brain works, and never learned how the brain works, because oftentimes we're triggering endorphins and dopamines that don't last in the overall happiness and fulfillment of an individual. And so if you think about the chemicals of oxytocin and serotonin, there's some interesting studies out there, one done by Stanford, that really researched into how to trigger those chemicals that are more long lasting in happiness and joy. And so if you trigger those chemicals, how you have to trigger them is someone has to feel purpose. They have to feel purpose tied to a higher cause that's somewhat noble in nature. And so if they feel like they're contributing to that in a valuable way, they trigger oxytocin. And then if they have that happen, they start to build relationships that trigger serotonin, and happiness comes. And in our organization in HR, we talk about, you can Google it, it's called the mood elevator. And it talks about when someone's in a bad mood, here's the behaviors that happen. And when you look at those behaviors, more often than not, those behaviors can get someone fired over. And when someone has good behaviors and they're happy, it shows these behaviors that are like, oh, yeah, that's the great employee that I want to have. And so we're very cognizant on our team about if I'm in a bad mood and it lasts more than a day, because we all have bad moments, we all have bad times. Yeah. Our obligation to ourselves and to each other on our team is to point out, hey, is everything okay? Because we know and we've learned if that person's not okay and they're not talking and getting help for it, trust is going to diminish. That's right. And so we focus so much on that now more than ever that we try to talk about how do we make sure the person's in the right role and we're being clear on what's expected and working with them on what their talents are to align the talents to the job. And we find when those talents aren't aligned properly, we've probably made a mistake in hiring. And in those cases, we have to be honest in helping the person through that to, figure out how to maintain trust through that. And unfortunately, the hardest part of that is when someone's in the wrong role, oftentimes they struggle to understand the other side of what they're not delivering because they just don't get it. And so I talk about brain science now because of Evan a lot, because it is so important for people to be clear with their manager on what they know they're expected to do, and that they align with them, that they're delivering the right results and they're partnering. And the manager has to partner with that employee to do the same. Do you understand what's expected of you? And so that's why we talk about one-on-ones are so important. Partnership is so important. And being honest with each other is so important, because when we're not honest with each other, we end up causing disconnection over time that breeds distrust. And so for me, I have a strong opinion on this because I've seen over and over again when someone isn't performing, the best of those people can receive feedback and say, I appreciate you giving me feedback. I'm going to work my butt off to change. And trust comes back immediately. Whereas someone that fights that, it just grows the distrust broader and broader. And so performance is at the heart in a company. of all that. And brain science really proves that out.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said earlier on in the conversation, it's imperative that companies let their employees know what is actually expected of them in the role, right? And it needs to be specific and measurable.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, then I mean, how do you give somebody a performance review if it's neither specific nor measurable, right? And it is, the other issue, of course, is whether leaders actually know how to lead. And
yeah,
this is what you're saying, right? Checking in with your people. Somebody's, all of a sudden somebody's mood and attitude changes. That's not their usual MO. Well, it's incumbent upon you to go to them. Say,
find out hey, is everything okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
This is not, this leads me to believe that something's going on. What's going on? Let's talk about it. Can I help you in any way? Do you need a day off? Whatever that might be for somebody.
Carol, can I share a quick story that I feel like a lot of what I've talked about today talks about the performance of the employee, and that trust is all on the employee, but it's also a two-way street. And so I have a story in my life where I was underperforming. And, I'll just give the example of what happened to me. I was wanting to be on the executive team at this company. And they hired me to change how HR operates for the better. And I had one of my first meetings with the upper management executive team that I was not on at the time.
Right.
The CEO invited me to be a part of that and present something that he and I agreed was something to present to them. I had the worst meeting ever. I didn't present well. I didn't manage the meeting well. I didn't speak loud enough. Like everything was just a disaster.
Yeah.
And I felt that. I wasn't sure how bad it was, but I knew something didn't go well. So I walked out of the meeting, and the executive admin to the CEO that took notes, I just asked her, how did you think that went? And she's the nicest person ever. She said, she cringed, she paused, she said, it wasn't good. And I knew, okay, I've got to do something about this. So I sent an email to the CEO and just said, I apologize, that didn't go well. I want to do better. And I want you to know that I know I didn't do well. And so that was the employee side. I built trust by doing that, I feel, but I was scared to death on what the other side would do. And here's what the other side of that equation did. My CEO said, hey, you didn't do well, but I want you to spend 90 minutes with me so I can talk to you about it. And so, I showed up for that meeting, still scared. What's he going to say? Am I going to still have a job? And he started out by saying, I want to be clear. I want you to succeed. I want you to be on this leadership team, but here are 3 things that I've seen that must change. And he lined out 3 very specific things that were very deep in my, skill sets that needed to change, that I probably should have changed long ago. They were part nature, part like if I don't change certain things that are a part of my introversion, it's not going to be good for me to make that leadership team.
Right.
But he spent 90 minutes with me telling me what needed to change very clearly, very directly. And then he said, how can I help you change? What do you need to succeed? And I just was honest with them and said, I might need some deep help on this. I might need this, but I commit to you, I'm going to try to make this work. And I left that room, you would think, scared to death for the future. But my emotional state was so excited for the future because he said he cared about me and he wanted to support me. And he gave me such clarity on what was not going right that I had very clear targets for my development. And that next year, I worked hard to change, and I did. And I'm now on the executive team, but I always go back to that story that it was a two-way street. I had the humility to accept that I did something wrong, and I had the humility to ask for help. He had the care, and that's the key for leaders, is you have to care about these people. And when you give them feedback, it should be feedback that helps them succeed. And you should care enough about them to want them to do that. And I find a lot of leaders don't care enough to do anything other than throw money at someone. And then they surprise them when they fire them. versus try to care about them and give them the feedback and let them know you want them to succeed.
Right. And it's exactly what I said, looking at the difference between leadership, a leadership culture and a management culture. It seems clear to me that your CEO runs a leadership culture. When he looks at his organization, he realizes he works for you, not the other way around.
He needs us.
That was a beautiful example of that.
Yeah, he needs all of us to succeed.
To help you?
Yep. Yeah, as leaders, we need our people to succeed, and
that's right.
That's the key.
So let's bring it back to why founders and CEOs listening should care about creating these changes, right? What does security and trust do to a company, for a company, in the long term?
Long term, it creates innovation. If you have safety to be honest, if you have safety to be honest with professionalism, because there's organizations that are very honest with one another, but people leave offended a lot of times because they're too honest without professional ways of communicating. And so if you can have a culture that is honest with care, with transparency, with the safety to make mistakes, if you make 3 mistakes, that's different than the first mistake. And so when you have that culture that you can just be honest with one another and work with one another, and every organization struggles with it. Every organization has to constantly work on it. But when you have that safety to be honest with one another, like me and my CEO were in that moment, that's an example. And if we can spread those examples and have that be the reality, the feedback to catch decisions before they're the wrong ones, the collaboration and inclusion to make sure everybody's needed in the right decisions for those decisions, you get them in the room and you can talk about it openly. You limit and avoid groupthink. You end the culture of just saying yes to the CEO. And the best organizations that figure this out, and there's very few that figure this out, right. A CEO needs people to be honest.
That's why I stay in business.
Yeah, you need them to be honest. And where it falls short is when people work around their leaders. And we have a philosophy here that's probably typical in other organizations, but we always try to promote it. It's just our issue resolution philosophy. If you have an issue, if you're offended, go to the subject at hand that has offended you or caused the issue and talk to them about it.
Right.
Have the courage to do that and have the humility to accept that when you receive that. If that doesn't work out, we understand that sometimes there's imperfection in relationship. Go to their supervisor, and then it goes on up the line up to the CEO eventually. But we want people to be direct with one another.
Well, and if you want to do that, you have to create and you're what I'm hearing from you is you're sort of working around what I call a culture of feedback, right?
Yep.
Which is where anyone at any level can go to somebody at any level and have a conversation with them without being worried they're going to get thrown under the bus. But the caveat is you have to teach people how to communicate effectively to do that, right?
Yeah, it's not easy to get there.
It is not. So anyway, anything we haven't talked about before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think we talked about it. Safety is a very delicate word, and it takes a lot of work. And I don't think any organization is going to be perfect at it because humanity, there's a lot of job security in human resources because humanity is complex.
Yeah.
But I think that really narrows down the focus to human resources, training, development, professionals, and leaders. You have to focus on development. Development of feedback is one of the most important things to create the cross-functional collaboration to succeed. So I think we can make these podcasts, have it come across that we're all experts on this, but we're all just trying to make it work. We're trying to figure it out, and we know the ideal, but how do you get there is the problem.
Yeah. Thanks for watching Evolving Your Workplace. Do you have a topic you'd like to discuss? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to click subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes.